Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the regular September 24th Monomoy Regional School Committee meeting. I'd like to call to order, and it is just about 7 o'clock. That's a first. Could I have a motion to approve the minutes from September 10th?
So moved.
Second?
There is a correction. On the minutes, Terry is noted as chair in conducting the meeting. I was 3,000 miles away, so I think it was my vice chair, Steve, who did that, just a minor. Unless I was by location.
You are.
We had a picture of you during the whole time.
That in itself is a little frightening. Public comment. I'm sorry, we didn't vote to approve the minutes. Thank you, Brian. We have a second? All those in favor after that correction?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Pass, thank you. Public comment. Yes,
Just speak from the chair, is that right?
sure can, I think our camera can.
I want to make sure they get the good
Catch
side.
Well, I think it is. It all depends what you have to say.
It's good.
For my side, it is.
My question really, and maybe my comment, is there was an pardon?
Identify yourself.
Lou Urbano, Harwich. There was an article in the newspaper, I can't remember which one, I think it was on the electronic media, that talked about MCAS scores. I'm sure some of you have seen those. And it's really, so I have a couple of questions and maybe even some challenges in terms of what can be done. Last year's battles were easy. They were financial in nature. But what the report brought out to me, and correct me if I'm wrong in terms of what it really meant as an overview, was that the 8th graders coming into the 9th grade at this high school today, that almost 50% of them, I think it's 45, 46%, don't meet the averages in reading and math ability. And that's kind of disheartening. And I know this is not finger pointing, this is not blame. This is strictly, there's a problem. And that problem maybe is at the meat of what has to be dealt with in two areas. One, at the lower grades, is there, and I know we want to fix it, but sometimes it takes some task management, some action steps, so that there's a change that occurs. One of the most beautiful words that I heard at the public meeting last year was, "Don't stop the momentum of Monomoy." And I thought that student, that ex-student who said that was right on the mark. It's something I won't forget. I just don't want the momentum to be a negative momentum. We want it to be a positive momentum. So the action steps necessary, how do we fix this problem, which is a national problem, but I'm only interested in my backyard. How do I fix these kids? Because you see, these kids coming up in the future are going to be my next door neighbors if I'm still alive. They may be my children's next door neighbors. I want them to be able to read. Because if not, the rest of their lives are going to be destroyed. If you can't read, the whole fun of life goes away. You change. And I think that's the fundamental responsibility of our educational system. And I don't want to say we failed, but we sure haven't met the mark yet. And now we have another challenge that faces us. We have this most incredible building, tremendous facility, which everyone is proud of. And we have 50% of the kids almost who came in with problems. And there needs to be an action step that says, how do we handle and deal with these 9th graders that have these math issues and have these reading issues? What's our plan for the next 4 years? We're not going to prepare them for college, more than likely. If you can't read, those SATs, if I remember right, you're dead. But they need to be prepared for life. They need to be prepared to be able to do basic fundamental things. They probably can, but basic to me is a little higher standard than just Tom and Jane when my son is born. So Scott, that's a challenge for you, but also I don't believe in just laying out bombs. That's a terrible thing to do. You have to have a plan, and I know you do. Whether you want to share it or not, I know you have a plan. I think the public deserves to know what the plan is for this year, next year, the following year, to say, look, this is how we're going to improve our students who are having difficulty. Because we've put an awful lot of focus on the AP courses, on students that are going to do well, and God bless them. My kids would have been in that group. So I'm happy with that. But there's the other part that we have to give even more attention to. So if I can ask you the question, is there anything that in your plan, other than changing principles, that's not fair, is there anything that is being done to really address those issues?
Well, we'll be looking at this, the MCAS data and other data that we have to sort of drill down and address curriculum when it comes to both the math and English. And I also think there's some bright pieces there with the MCAS data. And if you look at the 10th grade science data for the MCAS, our kids did exceptional.
No.
And
English and math.
yeah, but I think it speaks to capacity. So when you look at that one test, you say, okay, can we go? What do we need to do to go and elevate in English and math and be at that same place as the students were in science? And I know that you're talking about the English and math, and it's one of those things that we've started the conversation at the administrative level, and many of these the curricular teams are starting to have those conversations on the early release professional development Wednesdays.
In my issue, and it's an issue, in the business world, when I received a resume, you could tell who could read and write well, and you could tell who couldn't. And in 2 seconds, there's a flip, and it's thrown away. Now it's a push of a button, I understand, but in my day it was a flip. It was an actual page that came. That's the importance of it. And curriculum dealing with it is an overall statement. In the next month, can we expect these 4 steps are going, and they may not work, understand, I'm not saying, Scott, the community expects this school to improve by 10%. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the community deserves the right to say, we're taking these 4 action steps to address this problem that we really see as a major problem. Because, Scott, if you can't read at an adequate level, how are you going to do in history? Not very well. How are you going to do in sociology? That requires reading. Their scores there are going to be low. Reading helps you in a whole bunch of subjects. Math I hated too, but reading helps you in a whole bunch of subjects. And so the grades are going to be low. It's going to impact everything. That's why it's so important to address. Curriculum, I've heard that word many times. I never have totally understood how curriculum solves a problem. I understand you've dealt with some of it with lower class size. That's an action step to me. We're going to put the kids in front of the teacher, and there's not going to be 20 of them. There's going to be a few of them, and they're going to get, that's action. That works. So I need that. The community needs it. I'm going to ask you, is there a time that we can expect to hear something? That's putting you on the spot, forgive me.
No, it's not. I'd expect that we articulate what we'll be putting into, forward for next year, as we go through what our budget priorities are. We
can't wait till next year for those 9th graders and for those. I'm going to be dead soon. I want to see some results.
Okay, let me talk.
Okay.
We talked last year about budget priorities,
right,
and things that we were putting in place this year, because we could see the writing on the wall on what the MCAS scores were going to be, which is why we put in place a math specialist at the middle school. It's our middle school scores that were depressed, that we needed to go and improve and make sure that we had money in the budget to sustain a STEM teacher to sort of give our middle school students hands-on math, that second dose of math in that middle school curriculum. There's going to be there'll be other things like that that we need to go and look at putting in place, along with having our teachers look at, look at their students, look at the data, and dig down to say what are the curricular interventions that need to get put in place. So it will be, it will be coming in, as we look in the spring, but our staff need to go and dive into the numbers and the data first.
So if I can say this, what I'm hearing, I want to make sure I'm hearing correctly, is that we're going to take a year to investigate the problem, try to come up with solutions, and that there's nothing that can be done for 12 months, and that's okay. That's what I'm
I
hearing.
think what I just told you is we put stuff in place for this year.
A remedial teacher, one. Is that what I heard?
It's not a remedial teacher, it's a teacher, it's someone who we consider to be a very strong math teacher to teach math teachers who teach students. So it's something to touch all students, not just a subset.
Okay, and for English, is there anything that's been done?
Well, we were focusing, a lot of the budget priorities were focused on math for this particular year, but each one of the curricular areas are looking at their data and how to best address students in their areas.
It's kind of hard, you understand? I'm sorry, because this is an emotional subject. It's one where answers are hard to come by. It's one where immediate action is next to impossible. But yet creativity is always there, and in small companies, you never have the luxury of talking about budget. You have to look at your resources and see how you can take those resources and best utilize them. And if there isn't an English teacher that could work with other English teachers to bring up scores so that we don't have to wait, and little things like that, and maybe they can't be done. I'm sorry.
Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding of how the MCAS system works is that the students are expected to have to pass the MCAS test for 10th grade in order to graduate. And ultimately, the success of the school system will be based upon those students passing the MCAS in 10th grade. My understanding is that although it's not to downplay the importance of the scores in the lower grades, 4th grade, 8th grade, all the different MCAS scores, but I think the better analogy in the system is it's like when you take a practice exam in a class so that the teacher can find out what you have not yet learned, so that she can focus on that to get you to the end of the term when you take the final exam, and that's where you're judged on how you have succeeded in that class. I think you might be placing too much importance on 8th grade MCAS scores when they're designed to a great extent to tell us what needs to be done going forward.
Brian,
It's
I
not
disagree
a
with you 100%.
it's not a
Sorry.
sign of failure that we have MCAS scores that are not as good as we'd like them to be. It would
Disagree
be a
with
sign
you.
of failure if by the time they get from 8th grade to 10th grade, they can't pass the 10th grade test. Is
The
that
scores can be looked at in a number of different vehicles. Tests can be looked at in a number of different vehicles. Bottom line, when it comes down, our kids aren't reading at the level they should be and are having troubles. That's the bottom line. Everything else is for the good for the school. If I'm going to give a teacher, that's the bottom line. That's what those tests show. That's what and not just in this school, all over. We have an issue, and we can't sweep it under the table. We have to deal with it. Our kids can't read and they're no good at math. What are we going to do about it? It's not that hard. I think that Scott has done an incredible job, beyond belief, of dealing with accelerated learning and getting the top-notch kids to get the right education. I think he's done an incredible job of providing a curricula so that students will want to come here. There is no question. It is beautiful. You're to be congratulated. Your staff is to be congratulated. This group is to be congratulated. Now, I'm here not to attack, but to point out that only half the job is done. And half the job that isn't done, there shouldn't be a teacher that doesn't cry trying to say, how do we solve it?
Lou, if I could add, and excuse me, Rich Houston comment, and I'll follow up and we can continue this conversation. Rich?
I just wanted to say thanks to Mr. Urbano for bringing the issue up, and I think it might be helpful if I just give an example of how this works, having spent a lot of time working with the English language arts staff at the high school level. It doesn't take the test results in any particular year. It's a never-ending process. This has never stopped. It didn't take this year's scores. Every single year when the scores come out, all of that data is collected. It's analyzed to the nth degree, all the way down to every little segment of the subsets of the scoring system. And the staff spends the time analyzing that. I'll just make up an example. If it's students having difficulty with sentence structure, and that's for that particular group, because as you know, these tests aren't a reflection of the whole school, they're a reflection of that cohort of kids. So those weak spots are identified, whether it's a hole in the curriculum or whether it needs a different approach in instruction. But it doesn't take these scores this year. This is a never-ending thing. It's just that if you have one particular group where the scores go up or the scores go down, different cohorts of kids have different strengths and weaknesses, and the staff never stops analyzing what those are. So it doesn't take an additional staff member. That might help. Reducing class size might help. Having an additional team leader might help. But that's what we do.
But, and I really appreciate the information. What I draw from that, though, is that we have to accept what is.
No,
Because
no.
if this has been going on
No,
for
if
such a long
you're going to accept what is, you wouldn't be analyzing the data. What I'm saying is, when the cohort of students change, their weaknesses change. I'm just using an example. If you have a different cohort which has a larger percentage of special ed students, or a larger cohort of non-native English speakers, it's not that the teachers or the school has done something wrong. You've got a different cohort of students to meet.
But-
The scores in the newspaper look different, but it doesn't mean there's a hole in the curriculum or that the teachers aren't doing their job.
What-
It's that you've got a different cohort of students to
Yeah, I
meet.
understand it,
Lou, if-
wait, let me just answer it on here. I took a quick look, and I looked at the chart that shows how many foreign students there are, and I do know math, and it doesn't add up. The numbers are too big.
I'm just trying to use
All
an
right.
example. All I'm saying, I'm trying to assure you
That it's being
that the
looked at.
staff never stops analyzing.
I have no problem with the teachers and what the teachers are doing. I'll put that on the table. What I have a problem with is, we don't know. We as a community.
It's
Which
reported in
reflect-
these meetings, Lou. At almost every meeting, we
Lou,
have
if I
a report on what's
Rich, if I
happening.
could, and again, I'll move on because this is a cyclical, ongoing issue nationally. Just as this building looks complete, there's still a 10-month punch list
Right.
here to have happen. We really can't see that punch list. That's why we have scans and walking around fixing this or that or remediating this. There's a simile to what's happening with our math and reading scores nationally and in Howard and Chatham. It's the same way. We have 4 very capable new principals. We have a Dr. Blanchard in her role as curriculum director. Scott has this leadership team, including the staff. What I see that will happen, and has already begun once 3 weeks ago when the scores came in, that there will be a analysis of that data. There will be an action step plans in the next month or 2 to launch within the schools. We recognize that over the past several years, that's been a weakness that's reflected in many of the communities. And what creative ideas, what prescriptions for those youngsters who are failing, what contact we can get with those mums and dads much like going to a doctor, and saying, here are the 3 or 4 things in the next 7 months we're going to help your child to prepare for this practice test in the 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade. So that, and I'm not putting in their laps the plan, but just a layman. When you said that, that's what our intention. It's now late September. That plan hasn't started, but yet this has happened year after year with this weakness and how it's easy to play to your strengths. When we start to look at the weakest areas of our youngsters' growth, that's a real challenge. Hopefully we've begun the step of making this a 2 or 3 year plan where we can begin to reflect improvements in those areas. So what am I saying? Hopefully within the next 6 to 8 weeks, we'll have the principals and leadership come back with some steps that they're going to initiate with our present staff and next year's plan to try to address this and see and hopefully community members such as yourselves would come and say, decent step, let's see if that makes any sense. Are there community members who have math background who could assist us in tutoring with these kids after school at late bus time? Whatever these ideas might be, much of which probably have already been shared throughout the Commonwealth and have had some successes and some not. And partially, we might all agree that it didn't happen in seventh grade. It happens preschool, first grade, second grade, third grade, when the kids begin to start to become discouraged, when in fact they begin to slow down keeping the understanding of it. So we realized that as a school committee that this building project was a task that maybe came in with a lot of positives and a home run. Our real task is to monitor, and you know, when you said, hey Scott, you did a great job on beginning with this curriculum that addresses the needs of advancement. That job has only begun. He hasn't finished that job, and these principals are just beginning. So the same way with this, the biggest job of all of us, let's find our needy students. We have their names. We have what data we've got from the most recent scores. What can we do? We already have nice, decent class sizes. So with some in-service training for staff, I think maybe we'll begin to take that next step, and along the way, hopefully, we'll see some results. So
Terry,
let's,
you articulated an answer beautifully, and I really appreciate it.
well, let's see what
And I had
results.
to give Scott some kudos, or, you know.
Oh, he'll be discouraged.
That's right, but you did articulate it. Yeah, and I really appreciate the fact that, gee, if I come here in 6 weeks, I hope I'm not on vacation, but if I'm here in 6 weeks, I can hear the principal say, this is what we're addressing. Because if the community doesn't bring it up, it doesn't become a priority sometimes in some areas. Things become priority because they're vocalized. And I hope that that's the approach that I'm taking, and I hope that's how it's being accepted by the group here.
Appreciate the comments,
I
Scott.
also just want to address one misconception, you know, at least how you were presenting it. You know, our third graders, you know, if we look at the ELA scores and even the math scores, I mean, they're not as high as we'd like, not as high as I'd like, not as high as you'd like, and I'm sure not as high as many parents would like.